Hello, and thank you for joining the Center for Financial Security for our webinar today, Exploring Financial Capability for Refugee Populations, a webinar of study findings and insights. My name is Hallie Leinhardt. I am the Outreach Specialist for the Center for Financial Security here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm very excited that we were able to put this webinar together on this incredibly important and timely topic with presenters who can share such valuable insights and opportunities for better serving refugee families and individuals who we are welcoming into our communities. To give you just a bit of a rundown on our format today, we will start with some context setting and background on refugee resettlement processes by Jewish Social Services of Madison. We will then hear from the International Rescue Committee about their study, including some background on the project, findings, and recommendations. Finally, we will hear some insights and implications from a UW-Madison expert in U.S. refugee and asylum law. Following the presentations, we will have time for a Q&A portion, so please feel free to submit questions in the box at the bottom of your screen throughout the webinar. I'm very excited to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Becca Schwartz is the Resettlement Coordinator at Jewish Social Services of Madison. Becca joined JSS nearly a year ago to head up the new Refugee Resettlement Program. Over the past 10 months, JSS has resettled families from Syria, DRC, Afghanistan, and Iraq in the Madison area, and the team is looking forward to continuing resettlement in the coming fiscal year. John Vosper is a Technical Advisor for Economic Empowerment in the Program Quality and Innovation Unit at the International Rescue Committee. He supports financial capability services, asset building, and micro-enterprise development. Erica Brewery is a Technical Advisor for Economic Empowerment in the International Rescue Committee. In this role, she supports the development, implementation, and evaluation of economic empowerment programs that serve refugee, immigrant, and low-income families in nearly 30 communities across the U.S. Kazra Movahedi is a Technical Advisor for Economic Empowerment Programs at the International Rescue Committee. His role is to offer support and guidance to IRC's domestic network of 27 community-based refugee resettlement offices, which resettle over 10,000 refugees each year and in total serve 36,000 refugee and immigrant clients. Sarah McKinnon is an Associate Professor in the Department of Communication Arts at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Professor McKinnon is an expert on U.S. refugee and asylum law, immigration, gender violence, and women's human rights. Thank you all so much for being here today. And with that, we will get started. And I will turn it over to Becca Schwartz with Jewish Social Services of Madison.
Thank you, Hallie. Hello, everyone. What I am aiming to do here is just sort of set the stage for giving an overview of how refugee resettlement works in the United States. So it's just a brief introduction to give everyone sort of a basic knowledge here. So we're starting with what is a refugee. We hear this word in the news very often. Who is a refugee? So a refugee is an individual who has a well-founded fear of persecution due to race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, who has fled their country of origin and cannot safely return. The reason that that is in bold is that is key. So an Iraqi who is still in Iraq cannot be called a refugee. They have to have left their country. In the context of the United States, all refugees arriving in the U.S. have been vetted and approved prior to their arrival in the country. Another group that often gets lumped together with refugees is called SIV, Special Immigrant Visa. And this is a special expedited resettlement process specifically for Iraqi and Afghan nationals who worked with the U.S. Armed Forces, typically as an interpreter. That's very often what we find. As a resettlement agency, we treat SIVs the same as refugees. There's also another group of people who I won't go into too much, but they often have a lot in common with refugees, and that's asylum seekers and asylees. So they are also fearing persecution, but the differences between asylum seekers and refugees is that asylum seekers have found another way to come to the country and then declared that they are asylum seekers. Refugees are brought through a specific process to the United States by the government. So here's a brief overview of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. First, what someone will do after they have fled their country of origin is they will apply to the UNHCR, and that starts the process. Then they will be referred from the UNHCR, that's the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Then they will be referred to the U.S. State Department as after some thorough background check and interview process. They will be referred to the United States State Department, and the process continues of background checks, interviews, medical checks, etc. And in this process, the Department of Homeland Security is involved, U.S. intelligence agencies. Once a case has been found fit to continue, the State Department then refers the case to one of 9 resettlement agencies. JSS works with HIAS, but there's also LIRS, Lutheran Immigrant and Refugee Services. There's IRC, International Rescue Committee, United Conference of Catholic Bishops. Many of them are religiously affiliated, but not all. And there are 9 in the country. Each of those 9 have local resettlement affiliates across the U.S. There's approximately 350. And JSS Madison, where I work, is one of those. We have a contract with HIAS and the State Department to resettle these cases, these families, locally. And then finally, most of these resettlement affiliates, if not all, rely on thousands of private citizens who volunteer to help us with this resettlement process. So there are a lot, it's a lengthy process, and there are a lot of people involved. So I thought this chart was very interesting. It's from the Pew Research Center. I've added in the numbers for 2017, and this is since 1975, how many refugees have come into the country, and approximately from where. You can see that there was a big dip in 2001 after the September 11th attacks, and then they were on their way up. So President Obama had set the ceiling, the limit, at 110,000 for this fiscal year before he left office. What we ended up with at the end of September, which is the end of the fiscal year, was 53,716. So it was basically cut in half by a couple of executive orders that were issued earlier this year. And finally, for fiscal year 18, we have now been told that it will be 45,000, which is extremely low. It's the lowest it's been in quite a while. And we don't exactly know where these people will be coming from. However, there is an idea that approximately half will be from Africa and approximately half will be from the Near East and South Asia. So reception and placement, otherwise known as R&P, that is the main program that affiliates, resettlement affiliates, provide to refugees and SIVs on arrival. And our objective is to assist clients to become self-sufficient in the shortest time possible. The cooperative agreement is the name of the contract that we have with the U.S. State Department and HIAS and our resettlement agency in order to perform and document between 30 and 36 time-bound steps in the first 90 days after the family's arrival. This is a summary. It's not all-inclusive of the steps that we need to go through whenever a refugee family arrives. We provide housing that as soon as the family arrives they can walk into and be comfortable. Everything necessary is provided. We meet them on arrival. We provide food and a warm meal when the family arrives. Seasonally appropriate clothing, which I'm sure everyone can appreciate when a family's arriving in Madison in December. They often need some coats and hats and gloves. Assistance with compliance with U.S. law is very important. It's a different situation from what they've been coming to, so we try to help people to understand that. We assist people applying for Social Security cards and various other benefits like SNAP, cash benefits, and Medicaid. So cultural orientation is something that we also provide, and there is a financial component to that. I think that it could use some bolstering, but that's one financial area that we are assisting clients with. We do school and ESL enrollment, as well as linking to employment services and ongoing social services. So these are just some observations on refugee financials that I've had in my time working in this position. So like any population, I've seen that refugees have varying financial skill levels on arrival. Some people are, some people have come of age, have become adults in refugee camps, and that has sort of put them behind. They're not having a regular, paying bills and paying rent kind of situation necessarily when they're in that country that they've fled to. So that sometimes puts people behind. Other people have, were established professionals before they had to flee, so they pretty much know what they're doing and really just need to be introduced to the systems in the United States and how they work, and they're off and running without much help. Each case receives a one-time disbursement of approximately $1,125 per person from the government. Most of that goes to rent, and it is not usually given directly to the client. It's something that the resettlement affiliate helps manage and pays on their behalf to the landlord, for example. Refugees are eligible for benefits, like I mentioned before, including SNAP, various kinds of cash assistance, and Medicaid. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that travel to the U.S. Is to be repaid interest-free starting in the 6th month after arrival. It's typically a little over $1,000 per person that it costs to get for their plane tickets, and each family is responsible for repaying that. They sign a loan before they leave where they are. And finally, refugees are authorized to work upon arrival. I think that's something that is important to mention here too. So finally, I wanted to mention some specific financial challenges that I've seen. So refugees have the challenge generally, this isn't for everyone, but generally of being poor in America, which is something that a lot of people are struggling with. They're trying to navigate the systems that I mentioned with Medicaid and SNAP and all the other financial benefits, trying to help them find work. The thing that they have going for them is that they have our agencies like ours stepping in for them and advocating for them and helping them along the way. The foreign culture and language is very challenging. When you look back, they have very disjointed lives that could really disrupt their financial situation as well. And then very often we see that they have a financial obligation to family overseas, whether that's in their country of origin or in the second country. So that is all that I have. So Erica?
Hi, everybody. This is John Vosper with International Rescue Committee. I'm a technical advisor along with my colleagues Kazra Movahed and Dr. Erica Buri, and we're pretty excited to be on the call with you today to talk about this report, Financial Capability for New Americans, because we are not only a refugee resettlement agency like Becca's organization. We have 28 offices around the country that help refugees resettle into those communities. But we also want refugees to become a vital part of our community as well. And we know, and I'm sure all of you know on the call, that financial capability services can be a way for people to move forward. And so we're excited to share with you this report because your interest in refugees probably means you're serving them. And so we hope that from today that you can take some tips and tools and recommendations back and understand refugees better to serve them in your organization as well. So today we're going to cover these three topics. I'll take you through sort of the early financial lives of refugees. What does a new arrival look like in their first few months in the country to hopefully give you a better sense of who they are and what they're going through. Kazra Movahed is going to take you through sort of our outcomes correlated to our programs and seeing how families move through our programs and how they benefit from those services. And lastly, Dr. Brewery is going to walk you through some of the things that we've learned and some of the recommendations that we've provided through this study. So real quick, this study, we looked at 2,400 different family budgets from 10 different offices from 33 different countries, and what we looked at were baseline budgets that were taken around 6 months and some post-family budgets that were taken somewhere between 18 and 24 months. And we also were able to receive a lot of practitioner input from our financial coaches around the country, as well as look at some client case studies to be able to better inform our study. So for this first section, we're just going to really walk you through what a typical new arrival looks like in terms of their finances and what they go through. You heard from Becca some of those challenges, and so this might give you some deeper insight as we walk through some of these details. When we think about new arrivals, what we know about them is that they are working. Overwhelmingly, folks get into entry-level jobs, but with those entry-level jobs, they're definitely low income. They're making money, but barely, and that income is very volatile, especially in their first few months in the country, and we're gonna kind of look at that. But you can imagine going from means-tested income supports to making some money through a job and then maybe falling off that benefits cliff. The other thing is when they're new arriving refugees, they don't have a credit score, right? That's obvious. But although they don't have a credit score, they come to the United States in debt. And you heard Becca talk about paying back that airplane ticket loan. So every refugee family in the country has to pay back the loan that they took that pays for their airplane tickets to come to the country. And so that could be a pretty hefty debt when they first arrive. So let's look a little deeper at a family's budget. And first what I want you to glance at is just the totals on the bottom. So you can see this is maybe 6 months down the road from when a refugee family first arrives, that they're making ends meet, but there's only a $5 difference at the end of the month. And so they're very much in a precarious situation. And as my colleague Kazra likes to say, if their phone charger breaks, that could put them into a financial crisis. The other thing I want you to see is on the income side that they're still heavily reliant on means-tested income supports to help them make ends meet. The next few slides are really looking at how families progress through time. So again, it was sort of that 6-month family budget as compared to a budget 18 to 24 months from when they arrived. And this helps us understand what they're going through better. If you look at this first slide, it's just looking at wage-based income, the money they're making from their jobs. Only 4% of the money that came into a household budget came from wages at the beginning, but that moved to 63% down the road. But you can still see, just like that budget we looked at, 37% came from other benefits, and so they're still really reliant on that to make ends meet. This was very positive. We saw folks move to a net monthly income of $400. So that's the money that they're keeping at the end of the month. And so you can think about the opportunities that really raises for families, having an extra $400 that they can make some choices around. Net worth. Remember we talked about them coming in debt with these airplane tickets. And so although $150 of net worth seems to be rather low, if you think about where they came from, we're pretty positive. We're pretty happy about this statistic. And lastly, for those refugees where they took advantage of our financial capability services, and in particular our credit building programming, we saw refugees establish credit scores of 664, which is fantastic in terms of beginning a long-term foundation around building credit. Obviously not a prime credit score, but it really gets them into a good credit situation moving forward. So that's a quick snapshot of what refugees look like in terms of their finances in that first few months. And so I want you to keep that in mind as my colleague Kazra takes you through some of the outcomes, so as you as service providers can make better decisions around your programming as we go through this presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, John. Indeed, I'm going to take you through kind of our core findings from the over 2,400 budgets that John referenced that we analyzed. But before diving into that, I thought it would be helpful to offer a bit of background and context into into kind of what we mean when we say financial capability programming. So within IRC, there's really kind of three things to keep in mind. I think three things that help to really define our approach to financial capability. First is everything that we do. We're really trying hard across many of our sites that have these programs to align ourselves with the bundled services model. Some of you may know this as financial opportunity centers, centers for working families. Essentially, what you need to know is that most of our financial capability clients that are accessing services are also enrolled in another program that is helping them primarily to make more money. So that could be employment, that could be kind of access to public benefit supports and increasing their net income that way, or micro enterprise. They're also receiving kind of case management. So it's this very kind of integrated model, and we rarely have clients that are just kind of accessing financial capability in isolation. Second, specifically when we say financial capability, we're actually talking about kind of three pretty distinct services. The first is your traditional financial education, classroom-based, budgeting, banking, taxes, and credit. But we also have an emphasis, a strong emphasis, and when you consider the sheer diversity in our caseload, a lot of our work is best delivered one-on-one, so that we can make sure that we kind of tailor what we can bring to the table to the precise needs of that client in front of us. And within financial capability, we do a lot of one-on-one counseling, which is kind of more transactional and helping clients to solve problems or playing defense. And also have a heavy emphasis on coaching, wherein we're trying to get clients to articulate their own goals, and we work alongside them to kind of help guide a plan that they make, but the client is in the driver's seat. Now, Erica, who is speaking after me, will kind of do a deeper dive into some of our findings on the distinction between counseling and coaching in our approach, but suffice to say that education, counseling, and coaching are the core services of our financial capability programs. Lastly, many of our sites have integrated financial products that are offered to participants that are engaged with them. And by financial products, I'm talking about loans. So we offer credit building loans to clients that complete financial education classroom training, but we also offer auto loans to help borrowers get a job or work more hours. We offer vocational education loans that can cover expenses for training that may not be covered by FAFSA or other grant-based funds. We also have business loans, and soon we'll have immigration and personal loans. So these products are kind of sprinkled throughout, and they serve to either help clients build credit or to help them overcome a financial barrier to upward economic mobility. So with that, I'm just going to dive right into some of the findings that we have from kind of the work that we've done. So John laid out, and Becca before laid out kind of how refugees start, and John talked about this period of volatility early on. The next few slides that I'm going to show you are are looking at these kind of key financial indicators for clients. And what we've done is we have segmented our data based on the number of coaching sessions that clients have participated in. And so what you're looking at on the slide right now, the far left for household income at $1,944 are for the clients of those 2,400 that had no coaching in our system. And then as you progress to the other two plots on the right, those are clients that had 4+ coaching sessions, and on the far right, 6 or more. And so you can see kind of a pretty clear correlation between the intensity of engagement in financial coaching and household income. Looking at a few other factors, so we also looked at wage-based income, cut with a similar, no coaching 4+ and 6+ sessions, and you see kind of this general improvement and higher financial metrics for clients that engage in a higher level of intensity of coaching. Net income, and if you'll notice for net income, the gains for the 6+ coaching sessions are actually pretty significant relative to the step up from no coaching to 4+. We feel that this to some degree speaks to and is more pronounced than let's say wage-based income was. And we think that a lot of the interventions around coaching have less to do with making more money and more to do with essentially reducing spendings, managing money in a way that allows you to have some more flexibility at the end of the month. And we feel that in part that's what we're seeing in this cut of the data. And really, you could take all of my comments from the last slide and apply them here as well. Again, net worth is something that is very much a core kind of financial capability support and something that is directly targeted by our financial counselors. And we see some really compelling movements and correlation between more coaching sessions equals a higher net worth. We also did a couple of cuts based on products, and this is a very simple one that just looks at clients that had an auto loan and the amount of income that is wage-based versus those that don't. And you can see, about a $200 a month difference in wage-based income for clients that have received an auto loan, which then presupposes that they now have, reliable access to transportation for work commute. And we're seeing similar things for net income, unsurprisingly, on auto loans. Lastly, and I'm sorry the formatting on this slide is a little iffy, but one of the final things I want to share with you is we also did kind of a separate look. We did a quasi-experimental study wherein we had clients resettled by one office that did not have any financial capability services. They were the control group, and we monitored those clients' credit scores using soft inquiries over about a year and a half. And we compared those outcomes to clients in the treatment group that were resettled in office that had financial capability and that also participated in financial capability programs. And so what you're looking at on the slide is, again, a snapshot about a year and a half out. And so in the control group, clients that received nothing beyond kind of that general cultural orientation financial support that Becca mentioned earlier, about a year and a half in, 44% had a FICO score and 56% did not have a FICO score, which is, it's not terrible, but certainly there's some room for improvement there in terms of helping people establish an initial healthy financial foothold. In the treatment group, you can see that the results are pretty astounding. Over 90% of clients that were resettled by an office that had financial capability and that participated in those programs had established a FICO score. Now, you may say, well, just because you have a score doesn't mean that you have a good FICO score. And so we did a second cut that looked at the nature of the credit scores. And we said, really simplistically, anything under a 650 is bad and anything 650 or above is good. And so on the left, in the control group, what we're seeing is of this 44% that had a credit score, 67% of them had a positive score while 33% had a negative score, which was actually better than I think most of us expected it to be, that breakdown. However, compare that to the treatment group, where of the 90% that established a credit score, 93% of those had established a positive FICO score of over 650. Again, we think that this is, pretty strong indication that intervention early on for refugees and kind of a lot of the work that we're doing around counseling and coaching is quite effective, and that the clients in the treatment group certainly have kind of a leg up when it comes to establishing themselves in the U.S. Lastly, we did take a look at our data through a gender lens, and the results were actually really depressing. We found that women are accessing financial capability programming and specifically coaching far less often than men. When they did find their way into our services, we found their starting points to be among the most vulnerable populations that we served. On the bright side, we did find that even though they have a very challenging kind of starting point, we did see similar improvements in net worth, income, and wage-based income after just 3+ coaching sessions with women. And so that is an area of emphasis for us going forward. I think with that, I'll turn it over to Erica, who can help to make more sense of all of the things that I just shared with you. Erica, I think you might be muted.
Great. Thank you so much, Kazra. And we're going to spend just the last few minutes here talking a little bit about kind of our learnings in general and what some of our recommendations are in terms of sort of current programming, both within IRC, but really within the broader stakeholder community that is working with the refugee and immigrant population in providing financial capability services, and then, of course, some directions for future research. As is often the case, when you do some research, you find that there are lots of additional questions that you'd like to know more about. So just jumping right in here. One of the things we did, in addition to looking at, 2,400 refugee family budgets, we also spent some time really kind of talking with our practitioner staff and kind of trying to dive in and pull out some of the interesting threads about what was really happening in delivering financial capability programming. And there were a number of sort of key service strategies that come up again and again, and these are things to think about in your own programming if you're serving that refugee and immigrant population, because they seem to be quite important in delivering good programming. So first and foremost, relationship building. And, by relationship building, we really are talking about kind of cultivating that relationship of trust with the refugee family. As Becca, kind of addressed in the beginning of the webinar today, refugees are going through a very challenging, often very traumatic, long process as they make their way to the United States. And in many cases, have not necessarily had the opportunity to build trusting relationships with service providers. And so really investing the time to build that trust and build that rapport is critical to effectively serving this population. We also talked a lot about kind of this idea of intentional on-ramps, and I guess I want to unpack a little bit what we mean by that. One of the things we have found in our work with refugees and immigrants who are juggling many things and working to rebuild their lives here in the U.S. is that by and large, they're not necessarily walking through our doors saying, hey, I have this burning desire to learn about credit, right? And so in designing financial capabilities programming, it can be helpful to build this type of programming into existing programs and services that refugees might already be accessing so that they don't have to choose to participate in, for example, a financial education class, but that it's a part of, for example, English language training classes. Right, so being very intentional in ensuring that these refugees find their way into financial capability programming while they juggle the many aspects of their lives in the first year or two that they're here. Another thing to keep in mind is this idea of just-in-time engagement. And really what we mean by that is that there are many topics and financial products and things to learn about, financial skills to learn as you begin to rebuild your life here in the U.S. But it's not necessarily appropriate to try to learn all of those in the first 2 weeks that you're here in the U.S. And so Becca talked a little bit about how all refugees participate in cultural orientation in the first couple weeks that they're here in the U.S. But what we found is that that's often not the right time to sort of, put all of this information in front of a refugee because it's just too overwhelming and there's too many other things going on. And so we really encourage service providers to think about when is the right time to integrate financial education? When is the right time to talk to a refugee family about establishing their credit score and being very intentional in doing that? Kazra did talk a little bit about kind of our findings that there really are kind of these two distinct approaches to working with a refugee one-on-one around kind of their family finances and decision making. One is this sort of financial counseling approach, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, where really the role of the staff member is to provide direct assistance, sort of very transactional troubleshooting. This might be a client walking in with a bill that they can't read, or they need help making a phone call to address negotiating with that creditor. And in this role, the staff member is really directly solving that problem for the client, as opposed to coaching, which is much more client-led. And so we really have started to kind of develop this idea of a hybrid coaching model where the early interactions with the refugee are more akin to counseling, and the staff member is doing a lot of direct problem solving, but ultimately shapes that relationship to be one where it is more of a coaching type relationship, and the client has a lot of agency in setting their own goals and building the skills they need to solve those problems. I think it goes without saying that language access is incredibly important for this population. More than 90% of the refugees that arrive to the U.S. speak English less than well, and so if you're going to do education and financial capability programming, you really do need to think about how you're going to offer that in a way that's linguistically accessible. Lastly, an idea that we're kind of exploring a bit more this year is the idea of potentially doing financial capabilities work, and in particular financial coaching sessions, in a home visit model. We think that this might be particularly important in better engaging women in participating in this program. Kind of some additional learnings and recommendations, and these are kind of falling under the umbrella of promising practices. We very clearly saw evidence both in looking at our data set and in talking with our practitioners that intervening early is important. I mean, if you think back to the points that John was making, where very quickly, just in the first few months, clients are experiencing big, sort of seismic shifts in the financial realities of their household. They're moving from, an initial sort of cash grant that comes through the resettlement program, perhaps onto public benefits for a short period of time, and then into employment, and then maybe losing some of those public benefits. And so there's a lot that's happening in those first few months, and it's important to engage with refugee families in that first 6, 12, 18-month period. We also clearly saw indications that intervening frequently is important. It's an area we'd like to unpack more, but clearly more financial coaching sessions in our data were correlated with better outcomes. Kazra spoke a little bit about integrating financial products and how we saw some interesting analysis around clients who had access to specific types of financial products, seeing the needle move on some of their core financial indicators for their household. We think, in particular, early on, credit-building loan products show a lot of promise insofar as they help clients who do not have a credit score establish a credit score. And that's a key financial asset here in the United States as they begin to rebuild their lives and rent apartments and those types of things. We also think, particularly in communities not well served by public transit, that the auto loan product can be sort of a pivotal product insofar as it opens additional doors to employment and potentially higher wages. We certainly see the need to really be responsive to serving the specific needs of women, and we think that being intentional in designing financial capabilities programming for the specific needs of women shows a lot of promise, and it's something that we and hopefully the rest of the stakeholder community will continue to engage in the years ahead. Lastly, we were very, I think, heartened to see that as refugees are here in the United States for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, the needle starts to move in the right direction, right? Household incomes go up, wage-based income goes up. These are important things to see. But we also really recognize and acknowledge that those improvements, that economic mobility is is modest, and so we think it is very important in providing financial capability services to refugees to keep those goals realistic. And lastly, just kind of advocating for continued use of data, and we think in particular the household financial indicator data, which captures changes in income and wage-based income, but also helps you look at things like net worth, assets, liabilities, credit score, really provides that holistic picture of how well a refugee and new American family is doing. Lastly, kind of some of the ideas that bubbled up as directions for future research for us. I've talked a little bit about kind of our focus on this kind of counseling and coaching and the sort of hybrid model of financial coaching. We're really curious to learn more about that. How do you do that well? How can practitioners who begin a relationship in a sort of counseling format where they really are the problem solver, how can they then really transition that relationship to one where the client feels empowered and sort of has a sense of ownership over their own financial goals? So we're looking forward to learning more about that. We saw income volatility as such a pronounced challenge for refugee families in the first 2 years that they're here in the U.S. And so we really are keen to continue to evaluate ways and strategies to help families smooth that volatility, and in particular, smooth some of those benefits cliffs that can hit families very hard. We're intrigued by the data we have on credit score, but we're quite curious to have more longitudinal data about credit scores and how they impact kind of the overall economic mobility of refugee families. And lastly, as we've now said a few times, we really are keen to develop strategies and practices that allow us to more effectively, A, engage women in financial coaching, but B, ensure that they kind of persist through that financial coaching as they are often balancing many other things, especially if they are a single female head of household with children in tow and work responsibilities and those types of things. So those are a few of the things that we have identified as areas that we are going to kind of continue to do work in the year ahead. So with that, I think I will actually we'll go ahead and move on and pass it over to Sarah.
Great, thank you, Erica. So I want to quickly contextualize the presentations from Becca and the IRC team that we heard today. And I think Becca did a really nice job of setting up an understanding of what is the perception and the realities of refugees as they enter the United States system. And I think another aspect that's important to identify and to recognize is the importance of financial history in the United States. Perhaps more than any other place, the idea that one's financial history is one's history is important. This is the notion of a credit score or a financial history may not even be an idea in other contexts. Bad credit can mean extreme social exclusion. If you can't finance a car, you can't move around easily. If you can't buy or rent a place to live, your life circumstances are untenable and uncertain. And not having a credit card or a bank account, all of these things mean further social exclusion. I think it's important to recognize that this importance of financial history has to be contextualized within neoliberal political economic ideology that really emphasizes personal finance. And this begins in the 1980s where we see credit liberalized, U.S. citizens begin to hold more debt, and in fact, debt basically becomes a fact of life to pay for most every significant purchase, education, housing, a car. As credit was liberalized, it also became more important that individuals be seen as responsible. So this is where we really get discourses of personal responsibility coming into play, and that the locus of risk was increasingly connected to the individual. And as that moved, the locus moved to the individual, we began to see punitive and even criminalizing measures toward individuals who weren't good with their finances and money. And I think we see as a really good example of this the way refugees have to pay back their plane ticket, emphasizing the personal responsibility and the potential kind of education that comes with learning how to pay back those loans.
I think we also have to recognize that for refugee communities, low-income immigrant communities, there are a lot of predatory opportunities for others to get rich off of individuals who are poor or who don't handle their money according to this system. And so this becomes an aspect of the context that's important to pay attention to. And all of this together creates the context in which it's hard for communities who are, the IRC frames as New Americans in this study, to succeed and to not fall into those conditions. So responding responsibly to this situation, the IRC program and process that John, Kazra, and Erica shared with us today, I think does a lot of significant work to address the challenges that refugees face in arriving in the United States. And I want to touch on a few of the things that I noticed as I reviewed their study. The first thing is the emphasis on personal relationships and interpersonal relationships. Their recommendations really center the role of relationship building. Personal finance can be dizzying and fright-inducing for most of us, and I appreciate how this approach calls on volunteer organizations to support positions for financial counselors and other systems such as a woman-only finance group that really prioritize personal relationships. Most of us get our information from friends, family members, someone that we know who's good with finance, not the Wall Street Journal. And so this just makes a lot of really good sense. I think the other thing that I really appreciate about what they suggest is the offering of refugee-sensitive products. I appreciate this inclusion because I think it's likely that most refugees upon first entering the United States really don't have access to most financial services. And if they do, they're probably or likely to be predatory types of products. And so offering refugee-sensitive products allows these communities both to learn about personal finance, to build credit, and also to later then have access to maybe some more traditional forms of personal finance. I also really appreciate how these products can be culturally sensitive, and that's something that comes out in the study, which I found was really lovely and quite useful. The third thing I want to talk about is what they describe as the bundling of a service to address compound issues. They recommend a bundling of services because it recognizes that most of us, when we experience financial issues, don't experience them as separate matter. I think Kazra's example of a phone charger being something that can cause extreme havoc in one's budget, right, turn into a crisis is a really significant point. When we can't pay for rent, that impacts how much we can have for meals for our family, which impacts how we can pay our bills or save. These financial problems compact. And so the IRC's suggestion to bundle services and education that is filtered through relationships also recognizes that when refugees are having problems with one aspect, it probably is impacting other things or making many issues. I also really appreciate the integration of a gendered analysis. In my research with refugee communities and refugee policy over the course of the development of a refugee system, this continues to be a challenge of how to address the different ways that men and women experience displacement, resettlement, but also the ways that men and women gain access to information, resources, and services in different ways. And so this continues to be a relevant question, and I applaud this group for suggesting spaces, for example, for women-only finance learning groups to really attend to the specific needs and challenges that come with this question of finance for women. And then finally, I have a few last questions that I want to throw out to the group. One of the things that struck me was the significant role of the financial counselors and coaches. They're really important to the success of this program. So I wanted to know more about who these coaches are, what backgrounds do they have in both financial services, but also intercultural communication and cultural sensitivity, those sorts of things. And I also was interested in the difference or the relationship between coaches and caseworkers, so what that dynamic looks like. timing challenges was also fascinating to me. I wanted to know more about how you see this approach responding to different timing challenges over the development or the life of refugee communities. So you really explained that the first year is crucial for the development of financial knowledge, maybe not those first few months, but a little bit later on. But I was wondering how this service is tailored to 5 years out or 10 years out. Is there a way to still serve these communities with a more long-term focus or forecast as well? Although I certainly understand that the present, the short-term focus is definitely extremely significant. And then I wondered about expanding an intersectional analysis. So the focus on the unique experiences of women is really important and fantastic, and I encourage your further investigation of that. But I was also wondering about how products and services might attend to the various intersections of difference that come together. So for example, you mentioned products that are culturally sensitive to religious beliefs that prohibit holding debt. I was wondering how this aspect of cultural identity might intersect with gender and age, and how you see your frameworks attending to those various intersections of identities that different refugee communities come with and have. So I will end my comments there so we have plenty of time for questions. Thank you so much, Haley, for the opportunity to be on this call.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters. Those were very valuable presentations as a whole, and I'm super excited. So let's jump right into these questions. And thank you so much, Sarah, for posing those last 3 questions that you did. And I'd really like to start with those because I think you really gave us some interesting kind of things to think about. So first off, let's start with the question that Sarah posed regarding the financial coaches and the counselors and their background. And I'm going to first send this the way of IRC. John, please feel free to give it to Kazra or Erica, but please, if you would, answer that first question.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Sarah, for asking that question. I think it's a good one. And, we have coaches all over the country, and they obviously come from different backgrounds. But what we really desire for them to be is to have a financial coaching certification that's often based on the Central New Mexican Community College model or the Center for Financial Security model of financial coaching training that are provided around the country. And in many times, in many communities, folks like the United Way are sponsoring financial coaching trainings, and so that's basically a 36 to 40 hour training on both coaching techniques as well as some of the financial, the sort of professional development around financial products and services. The one thing that we do see that does make a marked difference is that our coaches who come from the same backgrounds and same language as our clients definitely have a leg up in that they can financially coach in that language. They certainly see the nuances and cultural aspects that maybe another coach might glaze over inadvertently. And so we often try to find folks who are refugees themselves to become our financial coaches and go through that training and continue to help them grow professionally.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to this question that Sarah posed regarding the timing challenges. And mainly I would like to focus on this idea that there could be opportunity for longer term or, for maybe working with refugees after that, those first initial months when maybe things are a little bit of a jumble. There's so much information and so many things to worry about in that time period, but maybe there's longer term opportunities as they become more settled and more stable. So maybe Becca, if you would like to jump in and give your perspective, having worked with refugees as they, move to a location and in those first several months. And then IRC folks, please feel free to speak as well.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the timing question is an interesting one. It does seem like, each family is going through a different situation, and our most intensive work with them as a resettlement agency is during those first 3 months. And it's sort of a whirlwind of, making sure that they get to the doctor and making sure that they are getting, all of their appointments set up and they're going to their appointments. And then by the time the 90 days is over, that is typically when we do start to see more financial challenges, especially when they have to start repaying the travel loan. Possibly they've taken on an auto loan. They're starting to have some income and working out how their family financial situation is going to look. And we often have people approaching us around that time, 90 to 120 days.
Great. And Erica here, I can chime in a little bit from IRC's perspective, as I think Becca highlighted kind of one important thing to note, which is that the sort of formal period of federally supported refugee resettlement is that 90-day window, and there's a lot that needs to happen, and it's really just about helping the family get settled in and getting kids in school and housing addressed and getting connected to doctors and that kind of thing. IRC's work in economic empowerment programming for refugees and new American families really is premised on the idea that we will work with families for a much longer period of time. And so, within kind of all of the economic empowerment work that we do, whether that is, career pathway programming or financial capability programming or small business development support, any of those areas, we frequently are working with clients who have been here for a longer period of time. I mean, I think if you look at our career pathway programming, it's quite common that clients don't even enter that program until they've been in the U.S. for maybe 2 years. Similarly, microenterprise, they've often been here 2 or 3 years, and so. I think it is important to recognize that while refugee resettlement in the sort of formal sense of what the federal government supports is that shorter period of time, we firmly believe that in order to really help refugees have, economic mobility, that often means working with them for a much longer arc of time. And so, all of our programming, particularly things like financial coaching, financial capabilities work, we're very frequently working with people who have been here for a longer period of time. And, specific to financial capabilities, I would say, yes, absolutely, we see a different set of needs. That brand new arrival family who's been here 3 or 4 months, they might want assistance signing up for a discounted utility program. Whereas somebody who has been here for 2 years is going to have kind of a different set of challenges. Maybe they're ready to start saving for an asset purchase. Maybe they had a misstep early on and all of a sudden have, a payday loan or something that they need help dealing with and resolving. So while the specific needs and challenges, change over time, I think I speak for all of my IRC colleagues in saying that we really see our work around economic empowerment of refugees to be a much longer arc than that kind of very first initial resettlement period.
Thank you, Erica. And then I think we have time for one final question, and this one is concerning gender issues. And Sarah phrased this in a much more beautiful way than I will, but I'll take a stab at it. So are there any current models that are being utilized or even just examined for working with women in particular in the context of financial capability services? And I'll direct this one at John again, but please feel free to pass off.
Yeah, I think, so Erica had talked about, or Kazra had talked about sort of the outcomes that we saw when women came into our coaching, our financial capability services. And you heard that they basically came to us when they were in crisis. And And we did see improvement in their financial outcomes as they stayed in the coaching relationship. And so we we know that we need to improve, basically, folks, to engage women on starting that coaching relationship and retaining that coaching relationship. And so we don't have the answer yet that we can fully recommend. In this next year, one of the things that we're going to look at in our data, again, is really analyzing women who have had home visits as a modality of getting financial coaching to really see if that alleviates some of the barriers that we know women have, just in terms of things like childcare, or maybe they're not working outside the home in a refugee situation. And so we want to see if home visits, make a marked improvement in both retention and then the financial outcomes of women engaged in that type of setting. So we should have a conversation in a year about that to see what our answer is. And then we've also embarked, along with a consultant group called IDEO.org, on a human-centered design process that looked at both the participation and retention of women in financial coaching. And through that human-centered design recommendation, they really were trying to tie in some more like long-term emotional connections to the thought of financial coaching and what that looks like for you in your life. And so we are just beginning to implement that recommendation in 2 offices, beginning here in the month of October. And so again, maybe in about a year we'll have some data to see if that recommendation makes an improvement, and that we would obviously try to scale that to other offices around the country if we could do that. I don't know if Erica, if you have or Kazra, if you have anything else to say around how we might engage women.
Yeah, the only other thing, Erica, here that I would add is that we certainly have kind of piloted and tried some types of interventions, specifically those that focus on kind of getting women exposed to even just basic financial education and sort of participating in that. And so, for example, we have one office that has created kind of a women's economic empowerment group that pulls from an existing kind of ESL class, right? So again, it's the idea that women don't have to choose to sign up for exposure to kind of this women's only economic empowerment conversation, but by virtue of being in this ESL class, they're kind of pulled out and have a chance to talk with a female financial coach who speaks their language. There's a few other examples of things like that where I think we, again, are seeing practitioners really try to create kind of either a women's only space or just that really kind of intentional on-ramp where, again, a woman isn't having to choose that she's going to participate in financial education, because we know that that's a choice that many women aren't necessarily making, but that she sort of just finds herself in that environment. And we hope that that can, again, kind of begin to cultivate that relationship, which we know is so important, that can ultimately lead towards engagement with financial coaching and kind of more intensive services.
Well, I unfortunately have to step in at this time and end the conversation there, which is unfortunate because I think we could talk long and detailed about this very important topic. But again, I would really like to thank our presenters, Becca, John, Erica, Kazra, and Sarah, for providing this really in-depth and beneficial information on this topic of financial capability in refugees. And I would like to thank the audience for joining us today. And as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, and we will post it on our website, cfs.wisc.edu, following this live event. And again, thank you to everyone, and enjoy your day.